Welcome to Michael's Meanderings Bushcraft 101. It's a beautiful spring day here in the Yukon and we're out to do a little bit of open air camping. I'm also out here to respond to a viewer request. One of our viewers asked about sleeping kits for the winter time, and I'll show you a couple of kits that have worked for me as low as -40, but also, and more importantly, I'm going to teach you some of the principles for staying warm outside in the winter. You don't need to spend a fortune to stay warm in the winter. You don't need to buy a super expensive down sleeping bag or anything like that. You can probably stay nice and warm with a few things that you may have lying around already. I'm going to show you a couple of those kits. Now, the first of those principles that you need to follow is that you need to minimize the contact between you and the ground. It took me a long time to learn that. The closer you are to the ground, the more heat you lose through conduction into the ground. So you want to make sure you have lots of layers helping to keep you above the ground to trap that heat around your body. The second principle is to stay dry at all times. Keep your sleeping bag dry at all times. Moisture is the enemy. Do not go to bed wearing the clothes that you've worn the day because they're going to be damp. And as you cool off, as your body cools off, that coldness is really gonna get into you. Secondly, do never, ever, ever stick your head in your sleeping bag, no matter how cold your face feels or how much warmer you think that's going to make you feel, because as soon as you stick your head into that sleeping bag, all you're doing is creating a chamber full of moisture, and that moisture, you're going to pay for it later on in the night. This is my preferred kit for the winter time. What I have here is a bivy sack, because I do prefer to sleep in the open air. I don't like to use a tent. Because of those moisture reasons. I find that 3-season tents, 4-season tents, it doesn't really matter. Moisture tends to build up in them. So I'd much rather sleep outside or with a tarp or in a snow hut. So I have my bivy sack, and this helps to keep snow and moisture out of my bag. It does trap a little bit of moisture in the bag, but if I'm careful, it's not such a big issue. I can usually turn my bivy sack out inside out in the morning and knock that moisture out. What I have here is a winter bag that I use. One of the things you want to look for in a winter bag is to make sure it has lots of loft. It's that air around your body that helps provide the insulation that you're looking for. Some bags lose their loft over time, and that's okay because you can pull a lot of the synthetics apart to put that loft back in, or if you put it in the dryer with a tennis ball, sometimes that helps bring some of the loft back into the bag. What I have next is just a thin little summer bag. What I like about this bag, it's nothing special, but it does help wick the moisture away from my body in case I get too hot in the night. Beneath that, I have just a little sleeping bag liner, and you know, it's not thick and it's light, but it adds a tremendous amount of warmth in the body to the body. Also, it just feels nicer against the skin compared to some of the synthetics that they put on sleeping bags. I find the synthetics, they just start to feel damp and a little clammy. So having just a sleeping bag liner makes it a lot more comfortable. Under that, that I sleep on top of, I have an old blanket. And this old blanket, the sole purpose is to help separate my body from the ground just that little bit more. And if for some reason I do get a little bit of a chill, I can pull it over me and it'll help to keep me a little warmer. More often than not though, with this setup, if I'm not careful, I could overheat. So the reason why I use a layer approach is that I can remove and undo some of those layers if I need to throughout the night. Underneath the sleeping bags, I have a thermarest, an inflatable ground sheet. It took me a long time before I finally broke down and started using these, but in the winter they make a huge, huge, huge difference. It's the difference between having a good, comfortable night's sleep and just shivering on the ground, because you do want to separate yourself from the ground as much as possible. So this is my preferred kit in the wintertime, and my friend Norris is going to sleep in this one tonight. He doesn't get to do a lot of winter camping, so I'm pretty confident he'll be nice and comfortable in this tonight as it starts to cool off. This is the kit that I'll be using tonight. It's nothing fancy, it's just what I had on hand. Some people might really question the sense in sleeping in this in the winter, but I assure you it'll keep me nice and warm anyways. I'm just using a tarp as a layer to protect me from the ground, so as my body sheds a bit of heat and I'm melting the ground, I'm not getting my sleeping bag wet with moisture from melted snow. I've tried to move as much as possible, but there's always some moisture in the ground. If it happens to snow tonight or we get some other sort of precipitation, which is pretty unlikely, I've got the tarp that I can pull over me, but I'll probably leave it open just because I want to have that moisture evaporate as much as possible. Plus I've got this gorgeous canopy above me from this spruce tree that I'm camping under tonight. I'm just using a couple of summer sleeping bags. They're not particularly thick, but that doesn't really matter. I've got them in layers and that'll make a huge difference. So I have the first summer sleeping bag and the second summer sleeping bag. And again, as with the other kit, the other sleeping setup, I've got a sleeping bag liner. And under that I have a nice warm wool blanket. It's not a full-length wool blanket. It really only goes down to just past my waist, and that's okay. I'll go to sleep on top of this, and if by some strange reason I should feel a chill through the night, I'll pull half of the blanket over top of me and I'll stay asleep on the other half. Underneath that, I have the cheap old blanket. Again, the sole purpose is to separate me from the ground and help provide that layer of insulation. And underneath all of that, I have the Thermarest, or the inflatable pad, to help separate me from the ground even more, because that's key. I mentioned earlier about never sticking your head in the sleeping bag. I have suffered some very uncomfortable nights thinking that I would warm myself up from doing that, but always paid for it in the end, especially on subsequent nights when my sleeping bag was soaking wet and I was uncomfortable and absolutely miserable. So now what I bring along, whether it's a mild night or whether I'm expecting it to be really cold, I bring along a little balaclava that I can pop over my head and tie around my nose and keep my head out of the sleeping bag so that it doesn't, so that I don't end up sticking my face in and getting everything all wet and damp. So this is the kit that I'll sleep in tonight, and I'll probably go to sleep just in a pair of underwear or a pair of shorts. I don't want to go to sleep, definitely not in the clothes that I was wearing earlier in the day. And I don't really wear pajamas. The reason why is because if I do need to add a layer later on through the night for some strange reason, it gets really cold out and I want to add another layer, then I'll do that and I'll feel just that little bit warmer, which is much better than going to bed all nice and toasty warm, sweating, getting your sleeping bag wet and suffering for it later on. If you have a hard time getting up in the morning and don't want to reach into your bag and have everything frozen and put a bunch of frozen clothes onto your body, take your clothes for the next day and stuff them to the bottom of your sleeping bag with your feet. It's a lot easier to put things on when they're already pre-warmed. So there you have it, setting up a sleeping kit for the winter. Again, nothing fancy, just following some key principles. Separate yourself from the ground as much as possible and make sure you control that moisture. Doesn't matter so much what you have on top of you, it's what's under you that counts. I hope you have pleasant nights when you're out winter camping and that this works for you. Please leave a message in the comments if you tried this arrangement and it works for you. Have a great day.